Hi, Darren. Welcome to University Challenged.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling zen. All of the admin that was happening before this call is done. The panic is over. Um, where are you right now? Out of interest, just to be nosy.
I am at home in a village just east of Peterborough.
Right, okay. So I am in a village just north of Newbury. So we're opposite ends of the country, aren't we?
Yep,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
are indeed.
Right. So we've had a bit of a chat before this. I know a bit about you, got some good people in common, but for the listeners today and the listeners to come, could you tell me what your full name is and what it is that you do today?
Darren Timmins, and am grandiosely called the CTO, Chief Technology Officer of Intuita,
Mhm.
when in reality I actually look after primarily research and design.
Okay. And what do Intuita do? What's your line of business?
Intuita is a data company. Data is a very broad spectrum, but primarily breaks into three, which is product and technology, our academy, and consultancy.
Brilliant. Okay. Um, and again, out of interest, because now I'm curious, who would who would come to Intuita? Who, because you've got quite a broad range there, as you say. You've got your academy, you've got your
In terms of
consulting.
people who want to work there or customers.
Customers, what sort of, is there specific industries that you would work with or that
Yeah.
you're attractive to?
So the consultant side is primarily focused in three verticals, which would be gaming, and telecommunications, and financial services. Although we do work in retail, etc. But
Yeah,
that's our primary markets. In terms of product, we aim very much at simplifying processes and tools to make it easy to use and try and abstract some of the complexity of modern day interfaces. And then the academies obviously pitched at helping people get into the data industry.
brilliant. So if we go back in time a little bit, what are your memories of secondary school? What were you like before you came to be where you are today?
Secondary school for me was absolutely fantastic process. I loved it. So I was a bit of a sport billy when I was much younger, and our school was very focused on sport as
Yeah,
well as trying to help those who wanted to be academically minded move forward.
yeah.
And it was the mid 80s, and electronics was all the rage, and the
Hmm.
government decided in their infinite wisdom to create new courses based around electronics, which
Yeah.
fortunately I got picked for. So that gave quite a diverse curriculum to what everybody else was doing. So like all of our study, regardless of the subject, was focused towards electronics, which was quite nice.
And what would that have looked like? 'Cause if I think about electronics, I think about circuit boards, but that's because that's just me. Um, how was the curriculum
Yeah,
tailored towards getting you, or yeah, keeping you interested and
yeah.
active in that area?
The maths was very focused and physics was that, but even English language was more focused towards the business aspects of it.
Oh, right.
So we did things like write CVs and how to write letters to apply for jobs and how to do video presentations even back then.
Wow.
So yeah, there was a lot of focus on doing things around um, business, I guess.
Wow. I was just playing Granny's Garden on the one BBC computer that the school had.
Yeah, we didn't have many either.
No. Okay, so when you came to take your exams at secondary school, what did you do and how did you get on?
I think I did eight in total or nine. I think I got
Mhm.
four A's, a couple of B's, the rest were C's.
Yeah,
Didn't pay much attention to languages, unfortunately.
okay. Oh, don't know if it's hindered you, has it?
I don't think so. Um, I think the fact that a lot of what I did was tailored towards being a part of a business or working with businesses
Yeah.
was a great help, to be fair.
And so when you've got your sort of brace of, although I don't know how many is in a brace because I don't go shooting, A's and B's and C's. Well, I have got two gun dogs. Where did that sort of leave you? What did your careers advisor or your teachers recommend that you did next, and did you follow their advice?
So I went to college to do A-level electronics. That was because school didn't do electronics. They were still in the classical sixth form mode.
Yeah,
As part of that, I did maths and physics.
yeah,
I absolutely hated college. Did
right,
nothing for me whatsoever.
right.
Um, Although it didn't come out there too bad, I got to a point in my life where I was nearing the end of wanting to be force-fed information and a bit
Yeah,
more on the can I make something happen for myself? So yeah, it was a bit of a frustrating time. Maybe it would
mm,
have been the same if I'd have stayed at sixth form, but yeah. And the advice was, go to university, you'll do brilliant. And my
mhm,
response was, not even going to bother to apply because I have no interest whatsoever.
yeah. Did you complete your A levels at
I
college?
did. Yeah.
You did. Okay. All right. And so that was your next step was you have to go to university, but you did not want to.
No. So I literally had no interest at all.
Um,
I'd done my time, to be fair.
and what was the advice to you then when you've kind of said, I don't want to go? What did the college, how did they help you take your next step?
I had a couple of, well, I was assigned to the physics thing as from a tutor point of view, and both of the senior physics lecturers gave me the same advice: was you'll never amount to anything.
Wow. Okay.
Which maybe was a driving force. I don't know.
Mm.
Maybe they were right. I don't know in that score either. But anyway,
Um, yeah, fascinating, isn't it? How I don't know. You think that they are centered on helping the young person to, well, it's probably realize your full potential now,
yeah.
instead of telling you never amount to anything. So what did you do then? They obviously weren't going to help you. What was your next step?
So bizarrely, I was working in the warehouse at Marks and Spencer's in Dudley, of all places, and the foreman there was his wife was an analyst for the Ministry of Defence, and he was encouraging me to not forgo the electronic stream, but that actually computing was probably a better place to be, and there was lots of opportunity.
Right.
And so, as a result of his encouragement, I applied for a few jobs, but obviously not as a computer programmer, because for most of that you had to have a degree. So
Hmm.
I applied for various jobs, and then I got a response from British Coal of all places. I think where I'd
Yeah.
applied to be on the call centre, bizarrely,
Yeah.
because they did a lot of work in FPOS in the early days. I was a credit card machine poller.
Ah,
They had a help
yeah.
desk, and
Yeah.
I applied for that. And then I went to Tenerife for a couple of weeks with the lads, and then I got back, and the first paragraph was like, "We've refused your application," to which I nearly ripped it up. But I read the
Yeah.
second bit, which was, we'd love for you to come and interview for a job as a training computer programmer," which was completely bizarre.
Right.
So I went and did an aptitude test and a few interviews,
Mm.
and then bizarrely at the end of it got offered it, which
Okay.
really was surrounded by grads in the interview process.
Yeah.
But there was a couple of us. Our mutual friend, Mr. Westworth, was one of those.
Yeah.
And it transpired that they'd had a few streams. I think they used to take 3 or 4 streams a year,
Yeah.
and they'd had a number of streams where they hadn't found the people that they wanted, so they decided to take a few A level students and put them in the mix, see what happened.
And that's quite interesting. Do you have any sense now of what it was that potentially was missing that they found with the likes of you and the famous Mr. Westworth?
Yeah, indeed. I think it was enthusiasm.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure British Coal would have been the first stop for many grads, and
No.
probably that was what was happening. It was obviously in a reasonable amount of decline by the time I got there in the late 80s. So,
Mm.
and its fortunes weren't exactly, that was going to give you a fantastic future moving forward. So I think
Yeah.
it's a number of things, but I think that probably played into it quite a lot.
Yeah. What out of interest, what what kind of programs were you learning to write and develop? What did that look like?
Yeah, so British Coal was a mainframe shop, so IBM mainframe, and it was pretty much all COBOL at the time. So
Okay,
every
yeah.
programmer was COBOL, either with DR1 or DB2 or vSAN. Showing my age now, very old.
Yeah. Well, you got to know the classic acronyms, is what I think. So, veteran, that's what you get to call yourself now. I'm a veteran.
Old, yeah.
Um, or old, or old. So, but what were the programs doing within? Because I would never have thought of British Coal kind of, I don't know, having a great deal of investment in that kind of technology infrastructure. It goes to show how much I
Um,
know.
I think British Coal had gone into it quite hard in the 60s, well before I ever got there. Um, yeah, and I mean, when I was there, it was used for everything from doing mining and technical to the amount of going on, because obviously British Coal was a pretty big organisation back then.
Yeah,
Payroll.
yeah.
So there's quite a few departments, and then the spare capacity was where I worked, which originally was called external, which was any other company we could sell to. But by the time I got there,
Hmm.
it had basically become a brand of its own called Compal, which we
Ah,
sold basically services to big retail customers, and as well as we were doing work for some of the banks. So it was basically trialing new things, and credit card payments had obviously become electronic
yeah,
around that time, and British
yeah.
Coal through Compower was polling about 70% of all transactions at the time. So what I mean by
Wow.
that is they were, credit card adoption came through supermarkets and petrol stations predominantly
Yeah.
originally. So overnight we would dial those up and get the cards and then process them and then split the transactions and then send tapes as they were then on couriers to Visa and MasterCard at Southend and Northampton. I'd be stood there with a little
Right.
pizza box to give the bloke to get on
Yeah.
his little motorbike and fizz off down the motorway at 5 o'clock on an evening. So yeah, it wasn't the height of technological advancement that it is today, but it worked.
Oh,
And
I did hear, I mean, this is showing my age. There's a Trevor and Simon sketch where they say the internet is run by a Pixie minicab service. It sounds a bit
it
like
was,
that.
yeah, it was very similar. It was, yeah, there was a lot of not necessarily smoke and mirrors, but putting in lease lines and things like that at that time quite expensive.
Right.
Although we did move to that quite quickly after.
Yeah. And what did that sort of do for you? Like you say, you kind of came in as part of a cohort of A-level students, so non-grad, and you're getting to do some quite interesting, exciting stuff. Um, did that, is that quite a sort of, I can't think of the right word, sort of pivotal moment in your early career? Did it, you know,
No,
create that
definitely.
drive
I
in you?
think I was fortunate to work with some very talented people. We had a very limited amount of resource.
Hmm.
Everybody had to pull their weight, so you were sort of um, you were in a situation where you had to swim. There was no chance of sinking, and nobody really had the time
Mm.
to put too much into you. So you had to learn for yourself and get on with it. People
Hmm.
were more than happy to help, but they were busy as well. So we did loads of overtime. We did lots of interesting stuff, and
Mm.
that was all against the backdrop of we knew one day and not too soon in the future that Coalboard would get privatised or broken up. Um,
Yeah,
so I think that also helps to focus the mind because at some point you're going to have to find another job. You're not there for life like some people were. So
yeah.
yeah, it was an interesting time.
Mm. And where did you go from there then? What, I guess, a couple of questions. What preempted your move from British Coal, and where did you
Yeah.
go?
So what preempted my move? Yeah, by this time British Coal was sort of in its death throes. It was starting to
Mm.
be broken up. There was little chance of doing anything else. The senior management were less than supportive. Um, so anyway, there was many of us who decided that it was time to move on. And I was sort of in the middle of that batch, I think. So I ended up going to work for another brand that's named probably defunct, which was Pearl Assurance in Peterborough, which is how I
Oh,
ended up here.
yeah, yeah. Ah, okay. And so that, because I remember they used to come door to door to collect
They did.
the money. Yeah, my family had home insurance for a little while. And what did you do there? What stands out for you about the time that you spent there?
Um, I think it was probably the first time I was gone to a new company, had a lot of experience. First time you noticed that, people were coming and asking directly for your input on things, and
Mm,
being involved more and more in the design of things. So I started to move into that sort of area. So
mm,
not just technical competence anymore, but also around design and architecture. That was interesting. And obviously the world was moving on by now. It's the mid-90s, and desktop technology was becoming more prevalent, and everything was sort of changing, and the mainframe was heavily into its descent
mm.
towards obscurity, I guess.
Yeah. And did you get a sense of the question for me is sort of at what point do people, and actually this is something that I wonder when you are really technically competent, are you likely to be asked about your qualifications or not? Is it based on the projects that you've delivered? I wonder if there is such an emphasis on have you got a computer science degree, for example.
So there was certainly a lot of that in the early days. Um,
Mhm,
Equally, the stuff we were doing with FPOS was sort of quite niche. So
mhm,
it sort of negated a lot of those questions. But in an average interview, you were certainly asked about what degree you got,
mhm,
etc.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, it was a challenge then, and it wasn't. It was very much perceived that, um, and it was true of the way we dressed as well. That it was a very much a white collar job. You wore a
Okay.
suit to work, and there was no dress down Fridays, or certainly jeans wasn't a thing. It was classed as a profession, and they wanted their grads to that as well. So yeah, I was
Yeah.
definitely in the minority by a big
Mm,
long way.
mm. It's interesting. No dress down Friday. So when I was at Microsoft, actually, the mark of someone who is technically expert was to be the one who was in casual dress, not in a suit and tie. I
Yeah,
think,
well, I think this is just because this was, it was an insurance company, and but to be
yeah,
fair, throughout the 90s, I think if you worked in IT, you were expected to wear a suit.
yeah.
There were very few that fought against that. Maybe the
Mm.
PC boys did. I can't remember, but yeah,
I
we were
just
meant to be the professionals, whatever that means.
the PC boys.
Yeah.
Um, and so from Pearl, what happened from there?
Went had a few happy years at RS Components. That was really good. We were commissioning new warehouses, and it was all like high tech at the time. So a lot of German technology was going in there, remote control forklifts and fully automated cranes, and there's a lot of robotics. And for me, it was brilliant because I got to do the comms, which meant that I got basically a giant train kit to play with. Best
Ah,
part of 3 years, so that was all good, and it was a great set of people, and we started on site when it was just like the frame of a building, and then all
yeah.
the way through to commissioning the warehouse and then post that. So, and it was quite
Wow.
advanced in its day. So probably not very advanced anymore, given what Amazon have done to the logistics industry. But yeah, this was a lot of fun, and it was real because for once it wasn't just about writing programs that did something electronic. It was about things moved in a warehouse and things
Yeah.
moved down a track, and all of a sudden that side of programming became real. It was interesting, very interesting.
And did you see experience any difference in the sort of makeup of the people that work there because the because the work was different?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the warehousing side of it, people from across all spec. It was, yeah. I think I was told to turn up there in a suit, and I didn't because the place was just so dusty, and there was no way I was ruining a good suit for
No.
to sit in a warehouse full of dust. So yeah, that's where my love affair of dress down every day came about. was a
Yeah,
shock when I went back to have to wear a suit, to be fair.
yeah. I need to know though, did you own a pair of steel toe cap boots if you're on a
It was
site?
regulation, yeah. I had a lovely pair of
Mm.
boots that almost became part of me over that 3 years I went.
So you built your warehouses, they're fully automated, cranes are operating themselves. What
Yeah.
happens next?
I actually went back to Pearl, but now Pearl was part of Australian Mutual Pride. I ended up doing a few different big projects for them, which was quite interesting.
Mhm.
But then AMP sort of maybe got a bit too excited in the UK market and probably tried to push Pearl as a brand too hard from a penny policy point of view into mortgages and other aspects. So
Mm.
yeah, AMP went back to Australia at some point, and Pearl as a brand, I think, just faded away. So I
And
left. Sure.
um, and just throughout this process, what was it that was driving your decisions on the roles that you wanted to take and where you wanted to work? Was there well, I could just leave that question there actually. What did you have an endpoint in mind?
I think at that point I did. I think I definitely wanted to get more and more into the design aspects of the whole project or program. And
Mhm,
certainly that's where I went with Pearl. I ended up taking ownership of a lot of build and design, which was good,
mhm.
but still staying technical. So while on my peers were becoming just more and more architects, as you'd be called today, I guess,
Yeah.
I was still designing stuff and then getting involved with the actual,
Mhm.
which was a bit unusual for the role.
Yeah.
More sergeant major than general, let's put it that way.
Okay. So you said you you left Pearl again for a second time, or AMP. Uh, does that bring you to Intuita?
No, it doesn't. It takes me out of the mainframe world and off to Virgin Money when it was a startup. So
Oh, wow.
bizarrely, it was part owned by AMP, but
Right.
in the early days. So I needed to retrain because it was becoming obvious that obviously mainframes were no longer on vogue. So
Mm.
I got offered the chance to effectively learn on the job at Virgin Money, which
Yeah.
was an interesting experience. I was basically set ways, so I'm to learn about server-based technologies and getting into Java and all that good stuff was
Hmm.
was probably took longer than it should have done
Mm.
because I've been so ingrained in all the techniques of doing mainframe.
I've got a slight judder there. In fact, so tell me about Virgin Money then.
Yeah, I mean the great thing about going to Virgin Money was the ability to retrain in what was new technologies at the time. So become very ingrained in my way in mainframes and what Virgin Money offered was the chance to go and work at a startup. For
Hmm.
once I wasn't the youngest person in the room, all of a sudden I was one of the oldest. And having
Yeah.
to now learn new technologies and work with some very inspiring and talented young developers was a personally great thing for me at the time.
Mm.
And it taught me a whole new branch of technology as well, which was good.
Mhm.
So I enjoyed that. And then eventually the time came to move on from there. So
And a quick
um,
question on the culture at Virgin Money. Was it, because I remember when Virgin Mobile first came out and I was thinking, oh, God, but it's really fun. And a friend interviewed to be cabin crew at Virgin Atlantic and everything just seemed to be, fun and young people and everyone's welcome. But is that what it was actually like?
so I've worked for a couple of Virgin companies. Virgin Money was definitely like that in its early days.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we it was very fun, very hard working,
Mm.
a lot of togetherness. We went out together on a weekly basis to have a few beers. It
Mm.
was like that, just what you expect the Virgin ethos to be.
Mm. Right. So why did you leave? Why did you go, Darren?
Um, I ended up in some interesting tech companies that got acquired by various telcos over the next few years. One of them was a company called Video Networks, which was basically a forerunner for Netflix. It was just too early. And again, that taught me a lot about different aspects of design and making things hyper efficient. So that was really good.
Wow.
And then eventually ended up at Virgin Media, running the data department there.
Blimey.
Which wasn't anything like a Virgin company, because obviously it had been Telewest and NTL before that.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And again, the culture was the culture, but I met so many fantastic people at VM who are still in touch with today, and in fact, quite a few of Intuita is ex-Virgin Media as well. There were some absolutely talented people. And then again, that comes back to the mentality of the different companies that ended up being part of NTL and Telewest, and the fact that it was a proper network and a proper telco. Yeah, and people have been trained properly, and they were very committed to doing the job that they did.
And how did your experiences influence your approach to hiring people, or looking for the people that you wanted to work with?
So my approach has always been the same. If you're good enough, you're good enough. I'm never really bothered about whether somebody has the right paperwork, or even what their age or background is. It takes a wonderful blend of people to make a very good team, and from everybody from the most dynamic to the folks who are more consistent in their daily output, and everybody's viewpoint tends to create a better design anyway. So I think it's good if you can create an open atmosphere where everybody can contribute regardless of necessarily what their academic background is.
Yeah.
And that's creating a better team is about, not about prima donnas or whatever. Not saying that anybody has a degree as a prima donna, far from it, but I think it just takes a blend so that everybody's grounded to the same level, and everybody learns something out of it as well.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Just making some notes here. So because it seems like we've got the link now to Intuita VM people. How does Intuita come to life, or come into your life?
And so Intuita started around the time I was actually at Virgin Media. And my major customer at Virgin Media left to found Intuita. So we already had a working relationship. After I left Virgin Media, we kept in touch. And anytime they needed infrastructure work being done or design work being done, they get in contact, and I'd do that on a part-time basis for them, because the business was primarily centered then around the consultancy, which was not really my thing. And then eventually, a few years later, they decided that they wanted to branch out and expand the range of services offered across the whole database, and therefore we needed to look at technology and also product. So they got in touch and they made me an offer that I could refuse. I mean, that nicest sense of the way. Yeah. So, but anyway, despite it not being the greatest offer I've ever received, I decided to take it because I knew how good they were, and all part of the fun, and working with some great people.
Yeah. And so talk to me about the sort of academy part of what you do, because I think that's something that is really interesting, and maybe speaks to your experiences. We spoke about it prior to this session, where you coming into British Coal, it felt like there may be a kind of correlation between the two.
No, there definitely is, and I'm certainly not the first ex-Coal Board employee to try and help instigate an academy. Certainly been folks like Rob Malaban up at Crimson in Birmingham have done something similar in recent years. I think the fact that we came through an academy and we were taught, good values and how to work, and as well as the technical side of it, and looked after, And the fact that we were given an opportunity when most others would not have given us an opportunity means that somehow it's our chance to give back. And after talking to the guys at Intuita and then working out where there could be opportunity, and equally playing into the point where I think computing, especially in one sense, in terms of data science, has gone far too theoretical for what most companies want to do with it. And having had some interns who didn't have the skills that we would have liked, but yet that's the courses that universities are teaching, was that actually, in order to make people fit for work, if you like, we would have to create our own academy and basically train people the way we saw fit, which was to train them in a business environment, not in a theoretical environment. Because as great as the theory is, very few companies are anywhere near where the theory is. So part of the academy is not just teaching those technical skills, but equally the politics of data and the personas that you come across and why people act the way they do and how people deliberately misinterpret data, etc. So it aims to be very rounded and give people the ability to start work in a job with at least an understanding of their skills, if not, fully cognizant of what those skills are. At the end of the day, it's a bit like driving lesson. You take driving lessons, you get to pass your test, but you're not really a driver until you've got years of experience under your belt. But it's getting to that point, basically.
Yeah, well, that's such a good analogy as well, because I wasn't once taken to a petrol station as part of my driving lessons, and it is as a whole. There's a group of us, like me and my friends, be like that, like the horror of going. What do you mean we have to fill it up? We've never been taught, but we had passed our driving test, which is frightening, frankly. Never been to a multi-story car park either. I mean, I have now, but but
just a few times.
yeah, just a few times. I normally have, a chauffeur. Um, so how does your academy work? Where do you find your people? How do you bring them through, and where do they go afterwards?
So our academies at the moment are pretty much based in Croatia. And there's a long and boring story that's associated to that. But in order to trial what we wanted to do, we looked at doing the UK market. It's very difficult to start an academy in the UK and get the opportunities. So an old friend of mine who used to run sales for EMEA has now got a vineyard just down the road from this place in Croatia that was trying to redevelop from an old steel town into a modern technology centre, and they've been helping out with that. And investment funds have been put in to allow people to do academy work while still getting paid, so they receive an income, and the course is free at the point of access, which is our primary thing to try and do. And then the course basically runs 6 months. We have 5 half days of classroom time a week. And then on the side of that, we've built a simulated environment for them to work with data in a given context. So the current course that's running is all centered around telecommunications companies. So the data sets that they work on are simulated versions of what you would get in a corporate telco. And the volumes of the data they have to work with are the same. So rather than working with a 50,000 line data set, they're working with billions of rows of data. So again, it's not that theoretical thing. It's about, this is a real environment. Again, the challenges they get set are business challenges, and then the personas that are involved will disrupt those challenges as what happens in a real world scenario. So it's our take on it, and it's a little bit interesting, but the primary things are around opportunity and equally giving it to those that can't necessarily afford to do. So this current course, for example, that's running at the moment is, I just can't remember, it's 25 or 30 people. But the age range and the backgrounds of these people is hugely diverse. And that's been true of the ones we've done before.
Yeah. Did you say that you had people come through that were ex-firefighters and
Yeah. So the last academy we were involved with, we had who we've taken on as permanent staff were from a variety of backgrounds, be that McDonald's or firefighting or
yeah,
whatever else, game development. So it's again, it comes back to the fact that if you're good enough, you're good enough. Doesn't matter
yeah,
what happened before. It's about how you can apply yourself to a situation.
yeah. Um, I just love that idea. And I'm quoting you, and if you're good enough, you're good enough. Um, but the idea that, like you say, I know in that kind of like cybersecurity space, there are like you can have these whole is it pen testing scenarios where you bring
Yeah.
the exec team into a room and then you scare the living daylights out of them by putting them through a
Mm.
simulation. Um, and I just think that you you know you do prepare people for the actual real world of someone's coming in, they're going to try and completely ruin your efforts because they've got this going on. Um, and people stay, so they're going to go to the workplace and not run out screaming, hopefully.
Yeah, I think we do sit down with them and explain at the start that this is very intense,
Yeah.
and that they need to want to do it, and there will be periods where they might not see the wood for the trees. And I was with
Mm,
this particular course last week, and I was trying to explain to him that it doesn't matter that it doesn't all make sense at this point, but over
hmm.
time it will start to make sense. And then the whole point of the academy is that it's constant reinforcement, and then
Yeah.
eventually the penny will drop. And
Yeah.
it might not be till week 12, but as long as they're prepared to absorb information and understand it and keep plodding away, then that's
Mm,
much like the data world is. There's no real rules in
mm,
our world, and people will ask you to solve problems or understand problems, or in many cases, if they're a politician, give you the answer to the problem that they've already given the answer to. So it just depends. But there's no hard and fast rules. Like programming is, you start with a problem and you solve that problem. That's pretty straightforward.
yeah.
Data is normally we've got a problem with this data, and then somebody asks a question, and then you realise there's another question, and then you scratch away, and there's another question, and before
Yeah.
you know it, you've started to drift away from what the original problem was, and you've now found 15 others. And it's how do you deal with that, and how do you bring that back to somebody and say, actually, this data is probably not as good as you thought it was. We need to do this, this, and this in a business context, and it may be fundamental to a lot of decisions that are going on. So
Yeah. And to what extent do you think that we have a gap in those skills, given that now every company is a data company?
there's a huge gap at the moment. I think, if anything reinforces the tiny little bit that we're doing is Amazon, for example, announced in November, I think it was, that they are pouring a fortune into education around data in the US,
Mm,
and not to deliver through universities, but to deliver through community colleges, etc. So there is a huge dearth of
ah,
talent across the planet. Um,
right.
Obviously, the downside to learning from a vendor rather than a neutral is you get their vendor bias,
Mm-hmm.
which is a challenge in the data thing because you try and teach people to understand bias because it's
Yes.
inherent everywhere, but you have to try and create some sort of understanding of where your bias sits.
Yeah. And you want a bit of critical thinking to go alongside that.
Definitely. And it's
Yeah.
that need to be sort of independent, even if you can't affect the outcome of what you've discovered.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I didn't know that about Amazon. Mm, yeah.
But there
And
is
that
just a
poses
massive
some big
skills gap
questions.
worldwide.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, so what's next, Darren? I mean, you've got quite a lot going on, it would seem. Have you got a kind of grand plan or anything you feel comfortable sharing that you're working on for the future?
Yeah, there's some interesting aspects. I think the whole chat GPT thing over the last few
Mm,
months has proven that AI is certainly now moving in the right direction, and that I can't remember what the Garner hype cycle has. What is it? The trough of disillusionment. maybe
Mm.
it's exiting that period of its life cycle. And there's certainly some interesting things in that AI world. And I
Mm.
think one of the next challenges will be is how do you evaluate one AI against another? Because again, not one AI will give you potentially as a corporate everything that you want,
Mm.
and nor should it. And
Yeah.
how much like when you do a vendor process, do you um, challenge different AIs depending on what you're trying to achieve? So I think there's a
Wow.
lot in that space in terms of, and certainly in the even more into the fraud detection side of it. As you say about pen testing and whatever, there's some really interesting use cases across um, all aspects of that sphere. And again, the data you feed it is key to that. So as has been proven in previous projects by the big technology companies,
Yeah.
these AIs have become incredibly biased incredibly quickly because they've been on the open internet.
Yeah.
ChatGPT has been trained in a mass amount of data, but in theory, a lot less biased than it would find on the internet.
Mm.
And it will be interesting to see how businesses react to that, whether they can find enough data. I read something the other day that AI could run out of data within 3 years. Not sure what that means, but it was a headline again. So again, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of misnomer around this. So to me, it's demystifying it and putting it back in the hands of people and decision makers, much like we try and teach on the academy, which is what does this data actually mean? Or what does the information actually mean? Because obviously data is nothing without context. And what does it mean in
Yeah.
context and all that good stuff. So again, there are lots of wonderful new technologies out there. It's just how you use them for the greater good.
Yeah. And I did on that chat GPT point, I looked at OpenAI's website because I thought,
Mm.
who are these people? And it said it was about, AI for the common good and to solve problems that humanity has. I thought, okay. Um, but I thought, well, how do I even know? How do I even know who owns this company and who is behind it and what the intentions actually are? And then I got it to write some copy for me, which was all in American English, and I felt very smug. I thought you can't spell organization the way that I want it to be spelled, but it was.
Very, yeah,
No, go ahead, go ahead.
the point you made there is about AI is it's very difficult to get it to justify why it thinks what it does.
Mm,
And that is huge when it comes to using it in an operational process for a corporate because you want to know how it's going to react,
yeah,
not necessarily that something's going to trip it and it's going to start going off on its own tangent, doing things that it thinks it needs to pull back on.
yeah,
So understanding the algorithms that operate behind it is actually, I know that's defeating the object in some sense, but there needs to be an element of predictability to make it work properly.
mm.
I know it's a
Just eat
counter
itself.
argument to itself, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I thought if it's going to run
yeah,
out of data, it's just going to eat itself. But is that it?
yeah. I think it was just utter rubbish. But again, it could have been ChatGPT that wrote that. You don't know, and I think that's another another potential opportunity for somebody out there to try and work out what was generated by these AI platforms and what isn't.
Yeah. Oh wow. So your work clearly isn't done yet, Darren.
No, I think it's just about bringing a bit of honesty back to it. The
Yeah.
whole industry, the technology industry, for years has been surrounded by huge amounts of marketing hype.
Mm.
But I do think AI is getting there. And then it's how do you hold AI to account, basically.
Mm.
Can't just let it run amok. And
No.
it'd be interesting to see how people react to it in general. It's one thing, folks in the tech industry looking at it. It's another thing when it comes down to impacting folks outside of it.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking one of the ways in which, just as a layperson, I remember like with my children, they're kind of taught at school, don't use Wikipedia as your reference
Yep.
point or follow the citations, figure out where it's from. And I find we have to do a lot of that with our teenagers. It is that, how do you know it's true? Where did it come from? What's the source? How can you tell? How do you check your facts? So I guess there's a lot of that, isn't there?
I think so. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who disagree, but
Mm.
I think you need to understand why the decision was made as much as the fact that the decision was made.
Mm.
Whether it makes any difference to what happens today with corporates, I'm not so sure anyway. But
No. And then in terms of like the academy, have you got a sense of like a long-term aspiration for where that's going to go?
definitely, we were talking to quite a number of different people about rolling it out across different countries.
Hmm.
There's a huge untapped market, we believe, in sort of LAM, whether it be Mexico or down into
Yeah,
South America.
yeah.
Obviously, there's a huge number of initiatives that are happening across Africa as well. It would be good to be involved in some of that at some point. But yeah, it's finding the right partners and the right people, and it, critically getting it free at the point of access, so
Yeah,
people can actually do it rather than have to incur debt to do it. Which
yeah,
again seems like a corporate moneymaker rather than an
yeah.
education thing to me. But again, maybe I'm just old fashioned.
Well, and there's the argument, isn't it, about that free at the point of access, because it shouldn't give you a life of debt
No,
to to
very much so.
get an education so that you can contribute to the economy.
Well, I sort of understand the principle behind it,
Mm,
but I think there's been a lot of talk about democratizing data over the years, and
mm,
it needs to be the same empowerment. If you understand it, then maybe it's better for everybody. And the more
yeah,
you understand about data, the reason more you understand why things are the way they are. You know, why certain taxes might be too low, why certain taxes might be too high, whatever it may be. But
mm,
you get a better understanding of what you're being fed.
yeah.
I think just that as an education is a good thing. And then from there, if you can get a career out of it as well, then even better.
And just for anyone who's listening that may be thinking that they would like a career in data, but uni is not for them, what would you recommend they do?
Very good question. I think the principles are about understanding logic first and foremost. So there
Mhm.
are many courses out there, but honestly, get in touch with us at Intuita and we can point you in the right direction. There's so many different disciplines in data, be that
Mm,
from analysis to science to um, data engineering to architecture, whatever. That
mm,
there's something there for everybody. Even the artists in the data visualization world. I mean, there's some really funky methods coming, or been around for a few years now.
yeah,
So it's it's just having that critical mind and then the ability to help others work as a team and get the best out of that data, wherever it may be. And I think,
brilliant.
talk to us at Intuit or ping me on LinkedIn or do whatever.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time today, Darren. I think that's the widest ranging conversation. We've gone all the way out to AI and back again. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today.
No worries. I apologise for rambling from one side to the other. But,
No, it's enjoyable.